Well, now to tonight's guest. Mark Ahrens was senior advisor to New South Wales Premiers Bob Carr and Morris Yemmer and spent 11 years inside the New South Wales Labor Party. He's just written an essay for the monthly magazine called The Hollowmen, which charts the influence of the faction that orchestrated the political assassination of Kevin Rudd, the New South Wales right. Mark joins us now in the studio. Thanks for being here, Mark Ahrens.
Good evening, Tony.
Well, today we've seen the magnanimous Kevin Rudd ready to campaign to keep Labor in power. But you write that the destruction of his prime ministership was unprecedented in the history of the Australian Labor Party. What does it signify? What's changed in modern Labor?
Well, I think what's changed in modern Labor is that we've seen the morphing of what was once the hard men of the New South Wales right of the Labor Party, who had good practical political skills, who had core Labor values and would do whatever it took in order to obtain power, but within the confine of standing for something. And they've morphed into, frankly, the hollow men who stand for nothing other than following the focus group polling that they're expert at doing and substituting leadership and vision for what people who care very little about politics and mainly are focused on their own selfish endeavours tell them in focus groups. And that has seen the collapse of one Prime Ministership and is, I fear, threatening another good Labor Prime Minister.
Now, what's changed? I mean, these machine men have always acted like this in one sense, haven't they? I mean, Graham Richardson, whatever it takes. I mean, isn't it exactly the same principle applying?
Well, I've been most interested over recent months watching you on your other program with Graham Richardson being an occasional guest. And I never thought I would say this, but I have to admit that I see in Graham Richardson an old-time Labor man with core Labor values who stands up for what he believes is right and says it directly down the camera to the Australian people. And the people who have come after him, particularly the former ALP State Secretary, now Senator Mark Arbib, and the current Federal Secretary, National Secretary of the Labor Party, Carr, don't really connect with those core Labor values. They don't really in any way stand up for them in the way that Graham Richardson always did when he was Party Secretary and a Minister.
But is that just sour grapes? I mean, you worked with both of these gentlemen. I mean, perhaps you didn't get on well with them, I don't know, but aren't they the same sorts of people?
No, that's not true. In fact, both of them are very, very likeable men, far more likeable than Graham Richardson was when he was the Party Secretary in New South Wales. However, what has fundamentally changed is that they are people who will always bend with the wind. I mean, if I can give you a specific example of my time in New South Wales politics, when Bob Carr, as Premier, resisted for a long while the focus group research about having a desalination plant to overcome what was then a very critical water shortage in New South Wales and particularly around the Sydney region. And he called it bottled electricity, and I think he was fundamentally correct in that. One of the first things that was done when, on the polling that Mark Arbib as Secretary had done to install Morris Yemmer as his successor, was to use focus group research to insist that a desalination plant should be announced. And within weeks, in what really foreshadowed the catastrophe of the emissions trading scheme backflip, it was discovered that while popular with a certain very narrow section of focus groups that had been researched, it was entirely catastrophically unpopular with the vast majority of the population, and a backflip had to be organised.
But I'll have to take you up on that because Bob Carr, supposedly the person who stood against focus polling on this issue, is the person who announced that the New South Wales government would build a desalination plant, was he not, in Dubai, or after he returned from Dubai, having looked at the plant's in that country.
No, that is a complete revision of history. What Bob Carr did on his last overseas trip on the way to London a couple of weeks before he announced that he was retiring from politics was to stand in a desalination plant in Dubai and indicate that if we didn't get a serious increase of water into our dams, this might have to be done. But he didn't announce a desalination plant. No, I think that is just completely false.
Yeah, but it sounds like he was moving in that direction without the need for focus group polling.
No, the focus group polling had already been done at that point of time, and he was under enormous pressure from the Labor Party head office to do a desalination plant, and he was resisting it.
All right. You write that in retrospect, the political assassination of the New South Wales Premier Maurice Yemmer in 2008 was a dress rehearsal for what happened to Kevin Rudd. In what way? How do you make that claim?
Well, in a number of significant ways. For a start, the then State Secretary, now National Secretary, Carl was using polling to devastating effect against Maurice Yemmer inside the Labor Party. In particular, he was heavying members of Parliament to move against Yemmer, saying that he couldn't possibly win another election, and undermining the position that he had taken over electricity privatisation. Now, the sort of advice that was being given to Yemmer at that point of time was that he should cut a deal. And when he refused to cut the deal, he had his head cut off. And in doing so, I think he probably brought the show down on himself. And very much like Kevin Rudd over the emissions trading scheme, he needs to take political responsibility for what happened.
I've got to ask, this is a phenomenon common to both sides of politics. We only have to go back to 1984 when the Liberal leader John Hewson was brought down by leaked party polling, internal party polling about his electability. Now, Tony Abbott's campaign team, Crosby Textor, they're very heavily reliant on focus group polling as well. I mean, isn't this just a modern phenomenon? This whole, it may be a curse, but it's the modern phenomenon of politics.
Yes, but I think Australians actually rather admire strong leaders who, when they have taken a public stand on something, see it through, fight it through. When John Howard did a backflip, for example, over a goods and services tax, he fought an election over it, and as soon as Mark Arbib and other key people in the New South Wales right machine won a reluctant Prime Minister Kevin Rudd to a postponement of an emissions trading scheme, it was a collapse in the political persona of the Prime Minister. People genuinely believed that he was committed to fighting climate change as the greatest moral and economic issue of the 21st century. And to see him back down on it saw his personal ratings and the party's standings in the polls collapse. And I think that really is the result of the Hollowmen who stand for nothing and couldn't put two and two together, that someone who'd built their persona publicly around the issue would crumble if they were seen to run away from it and not be prepared to fight.
Well, are you suggesting that Julia Gillard has taken similar advice because her recent climate policy ends up relying reasonably heavily on a citizens' council or a group of unelected citizens to somehow define the policy?
Oh, absolutely. This is I frankly am mystified by the way in which this policy has been sculpted in the context of this election. It's absolutely clear from all of the polling that people want leadership on this issue, and they expect leadership. And having been one of those who sat around the kitchen cabinet table and advocated perhaps, as I understand, an even more radical junking of the emissions trading scheme altogether, and having then seen what the consequence was for Kevin Rudd, it's sort of unbelievable that she would follow the advice that she's been given by the machine to have no policy, no real policy to take to the people who are looking for leadership.
But then you've got the let Gillard be Gillard idea, the real Julia Gillard, please stand up. I mean, this is her putting aside that kind of advice, is it not?
Well, I certainly hope that that is the case, because her standing has fallen just as dramatically as Kevin Rudd's did, and interestingly, coincidentally, around exactly the same policy, climate change. And if she doesn't show her real leadership and take issues like that on in a very concrete way, I fear that however real she projects herself, she won't win the battle about what sort of leadership Australia needs over big issues like climate change.
Well, let me go back to your original point, though. Why single out New South Wales? In particular, why single out the New South Wales factional leaders? I mean, when Kevin Rudd's assassination, in fact, required a kind of coalition of right-wing faction leaders from Victoria and New South Wales, more of them, in fact, from Victoria. We had Bill Shorten and a number of other characters, Feeney and so on. So why single out the New South Wales? I mean, you obviously work for the New South Wales government. Is that the main reason you single them out? I mean, there seem to be a range of people involved in this.
Oh, and I make it clear in the article I've written in this month's monthly magazine that it was such a coalition that ultimately brought Rudd down. And indeed, I think it would be fair to say that